Hello, you know me. I'm Dr. Mark Andrew, Colonel Holowchak, and this is One Word, Five Questions, episode 86 already. And today I'm going to talk about a knotty nodus at the end of Query 17 of Thomas Jefferson's Notes on Virginia. Now, I've always impressed upon people that the way to do good history, the way to do good philosophy, is to take a small, manageable problem and do a thorough job of investigating and solving that problem or working in that area. Such a good job that anybody who wishes to write on that topic needs to access your material, right, in order to do a thorough job of what he or she's going to do. Now, that's essentially what I want to do today. We look at I want to look at a puzzling passage at the end of Query 17, titled Religion in Jefferson's Notes on the State of Virginia. Look at a passage that I consider to be knotty, reticular, Gordian, nebulous, labyrinthine, and even mazy. And go through that thoroughly, or as thoroughly as we can, and try to see if we can't make some headway in understanding that. I'm always sort of intrigued by one of the things that really inclines me to an interest in Jeffersonian scholarship is that Jefferson was so widely read and he wrote so many things that they're always, and he wrote so many things that are quite interesting philosophically, historically, politically, and so forth, that it's always a challenge and it's always rewarding to return to some of the things that he has written and reevaluate them or go to certain parts that have proved to be puzzling. And I'm going to do that today. Now, before I begin, let me remind readers of the aim of this show. The aim of this program, One Word, Five Questions, is to look at a particular writing by Thomas Jefferson, examine it thoroughly, or to take some part of it, as we're going to do today, and examine that thoroughly, right? And in doing so as a springboard for further discussion, right? And so we do the latter in this episode. Now, I'm Mark, Colonel Holowchak, and this is One Word, Five Questions, number 86. A knotty notice, notice is a problem, knotty notice at the end of Query 17. Now, I want to read to you this passage in full, and I'll bring it up. Is the spirit of the people an infallible, a permanent reliance? Is it government? Is this the kind of protection we receive in return for the rights we give up? Besides, the spirit of the times may alter, will alter. Our rulers will become corrupt, our people careless. A single zealot may commence persecutor, and better men be his victims. It can never be too often repeated that the time for fixing every essential right on a legal basis is while our rulers are honest and ourselves united. From the conclusion of this war, we shall be going downhill. Will it not be necessary? It will not then be necessary to resort every moment to the people for support. They will be forgotten, therefore, and their rights disregarded. They will forget themselves, but in the sole faculty of making money, and will never think of uniting to effect a due respect for their rights. The shackles, therefore, which shall not be knocked off at the conclusion of this war, will remain on us long, will be made heavier and heavier till our rights shall revive or expire in convulsion. All right. Let's me bring up the passage and work through it. And I found it important to, in working through it, to, let me bring it up in a larger version. I found it important to break this section of a long paragraph that Jefferson writes into five different paragraphs, because there are different things going on here. Now, first off, one can ask, what's the context of this letter? He's talking about religion, and Jefferson writes about, he's writing about how in New York and Pennsylvania, they have opened the door to religious pluralism. In other words, they've gone away from state sanction of any particular sort of religion, and they have allowed people of all different types of religious persuasions to worship in their own way. And that's what he's talking about prior to this passage. So the first thing we notice is that everything we have here is an aside. So my first concern, my first puzzlement is that why does Jefferson put this in on a section on religion? Does it really fit? And one answer to that is no, it really doesn't fit. So why does he put that in? And a second problem with this passage is that it's typically pessimistic. And Jefferson seldom in any of his writings waxes pessimistic. So let's go through this paragraph by paragraph. So I've given you the context. It's about religious pluralism, open embrace for that. And then he goes off and asks, and I'll break this up into 5 paragraphs and try to figure out what he's talking about and why this is put in the section in which it's put. At the end of end of Query 17, titled Religion, he says, but is the spirit of the people an infallible, permanent reliance? Is it government? Is this the kind of protection we receive in return for the rights we give up? So first question is, what does he mean by the spirit of the people? Well, he simply means the vox populi, the voice of the people. And he says in several letters in 1816, for example, if you look at it, Jefferson in 1816 is fighting to define Jeffersonian republicanism, what we would call democracy today. He's trying to come up with a precise definition of it. And in effect, he says the essence of democracy, the essence of Jeffersonian republicanism, is its government modeled on the vox populi, on the voice of the people, the spirit of the people. In a letter to John Taylor, 1816, he writes, were I to assign a term, this term, a precise and definite idea, I would say purely and simply, it means a government by its citizens in mass, acting directly and personally according to rules established by the majority, and that every other government is more or less Republican in proportion as it has its component more or less of this ingredient. So the more or less ingredient of which he's talking is popular government, right? Later in the same letter, he says governments are more or less Republican as they have more or less of the element of popular election and control of their composition, right? And he says, and believing as I do that the mass of the citizens is the safest depository of their own rights, and especially that of evils, that the evils from the duperies of the people are less injurious than those of the egoism of their agents. I am a friend to that composition of government which has in it the most of this ingredient, right? So he's not arguing necessarily that Republican government is the best form of government. I think he believes that's the case, but what he's arguing for here, at least moderately, that if you're going to have if you want a government that respects the rights of people, it has to be a government based on the will of the people. Their representatives are not trustworthy. All right. Same year, he has a letter to Samuel Kercheval. He says, governments are Republican only in proportion as they embody the will of their people and execute it. Later in the letter, where then is our republicanism to be found? Not in our Constitution, certainly, but merely in the spirit of the people. That would oblige even a despot to govern us republicanly. Owing to the spirit and to nothing in the form of our Constitution, all things have gone well. So it's not in the form of the Constitution. What he means by this, it's not in a Constitution proper, but it's in a Constitution that represents the will of the people. A malleable Constitution, a Constitution that's always changing to represent the will of the people. And see what it says in here. I think that's all I wanted to talk about from here. I mean, so there's so much going on in this letter, but what's really intriguing here is the notion that government has to be based or ought to be based on the will of the people if it's a government that's going to be preserving or in the spirit of preserving the rights of people. And he says in the second, as I break up in the second paragraph, fourth sentence, besides the spirit of the times will alter, our rulers will become corrupt, our people careless, a single zealot may commence persecutor, and better men be his victims. What does he mean here? Here we get a sour term. Spirit of times may alter, and then a comma. It's not may alter, it will alter. Our rulers will become corrupt. Not talking about possibilities anymore. It says it's going to happen. Are people careless? Right? It's a sentiment that Plato articulates in books 8 and 9 of Republic, where he talks about in a democracy, which he thought was a degenerate form of government, at least the sort of democracy we would say today, which each person thinks he's a fit ruler, right? That becomes chaotic because, in a large body of people, you can't have everybody ruling. You have to have certain, Jefferson would say, certain representatives. But here we have times altering and things taking a downward spiral. Okay, a single zealot. And Jefferson thinks that, not Jefferson, Plato thinks that when you have a pure democracy where everybody thinks he's fit to rule, what you have is you have chaos. And out of that chaos will generally surface a clever usurper, a tyrant. It's the perfect environment for a strong-willed tyrant to come in, take control of the chaos, and rule despotically. Third paragraph, it can never be too often repeated that the time for fixing every essential right on the legal basis is while our rulers are honest and ourselves united. So he's piggybacking on the other 3 sentences that the times will alter. He's writing Notes on the State of Virginia, after his term as governor in 1781. So he's writing 1781, 1782. And he takes the work with him in France. And while he's writing this, the Revolutionary War is still going on, ends in 1783. And so this is the time while we're fighting a war, it's the time to fix the rights on a legal basis. In other words, articulate those rights in a document, what would be, appended to the Constitution, Bill of Rights, the constitutional amendments, while our rulers are honest and ourselves united. So there's, in the second couple paragraphs, as I break them out to be, we get this time, well, as long as the war is going on, people are honest, ourselves united. So he's given us a scenario, it seems to me, that there will be, because of the nature of people or because of human greed, there will be periods where people in a free country will take those rights for granted. And at some period of time, they will slide into debasement, not the basement, debasement, and they'll forget their rights, right? We need to act on this now. We need to formalize our rights and agree on them and put them in some sort of document. Okay, so from the conclusion of this war, we shall be going downhill, he says. It will not then be necessary to resort every moment to the people for support. They will be forgotten, therefore, and their rights disregarded. So he's talking about a time where the mass of the people, all the rights we talk, no one's going to care about them. You've got corrupt people running things. The people will forget themselves within the sole faculty of making money and will never think of uniting to effect a due respect for their rights. Now, here again, uh, you have a revolution. What is a revolution? I have a section of my book on the disease of liberty, Thomas Jefferson on history and liberty. And I talk about, in my book on Jefferson's political philosophy, I talk about what Jefferson means by revolution. He thinks there are three stages: inchoation, the beginning of a revolution, then the sustenance of the revolution, the energy that goes into sustaining it. And then you have the eventuation in a new form of government. And if I'm correct, I would say myself that the essence of a revolution, what separates a revolution from, say, minor uprisings and things like that, is that it's essentially ideologically driven. What is essential for any definition of a revolution is that there needs to be a change of ideology. So things like the Orange Revolution in Ukraine in 2004, where Ukrainian protesters by the tens of thousands took to the streets to protest Viktor Yanukovych's stealing of the election through rather dubious means of vote counting and buying votes and all sorts of things is not really so much a revolution per se, but maybe an uprising. But it's because it's not really fomented by a change, presumably of ideologies. After the revolution, things get back to normal. So, I mean, you have this whole notion of a revolution, ideologically based. It has a start, it is going on, and it has fire, it endures, and then it has an end where you try to implement the ideological principles that drove the revolution. And this needs to be done, Jefferson says, by different set of people. Um, so I think Jefferson is hinting at here, at least, that in any sort of free government, people will at some point take their freedom. They will disregard their freedom. They will take it for granted. As I said in my book on the disease of liberty, freedom is a lot like air. It's really the most precious thing that a living thing or human being can have, but we take it for granted when it exists in abundance. And when it is wanting, we desire it more than anything. And so the idea here, as Jefferson says, we're going to have when we have a superabundancy of freedom, right? And we don't care about our rights anymore. We start turning toward making money and thinking about ourselves and not participating in Republican governing. And he ends, he says, the shackles, therefore, which shall not be knocked off at the conclusion of this war will remain on us long, will be made heavier and heavier till our rights shall revive or expire in a convulsion. So, what is he saying here? I mean, we get again a rather sour ending here, and he ends the query on that sour note, right? It's a very puzzling passage for me. First, it doesn't fit in with what he's saying on religion and the need for religious freedom. And so he's talking about religious freedom. Then he segues into the notion of liberty itself, right? And the need for codifying our rights and agreeing on them immediately after the revolution, so that when things normalize, as it were, we can at least have a codification of our rights, some written expression of them somewhere, and revert to them in time of need. But again, he's talking about that things will necessarily degenerate. And that's puzzling for me because he defines people as morality driven creatures. We tend to want to do good. If we're not impeded in our activities. We tend to want to do good, and we probably will do good most of the time. So why is it that we're going to slip into this mode of money making? Why is it that we're going to, have this great fall? Jefferson is almost a wholly optimistic person in all of his writings. And here he throws in this rather pessimistic diatribe in a spot where he doesn't belong. He's clearly in a sour mood at the time for whatever reason. Couldn't quite tell you, but and the point is, if there's a lot of substance what he's saying, it's something you might expect John Adams to say, or Hamilton, but Hamilton would not say this whole drive to desire to make money is a bad thing. So, well, that's the way people want money, and they like money, and we're naturally selfish, and I don't think he would apologize for it. Adams might, who knows. So what does this say, all in all, by our love of liberty? I'm doing a lot of work, as some of you know already, I'm working on Ukraine, a book titled Ukraine, The Deep Roots of a Young Nation. And I trace, the history of Ukrainians all the way back to prior to the formation of Kiev Rus, right around 800 AD, and go throughout the periods of the history of the Ukrainian people. And it's a motley story that I tell. And you want to come up, Jeff? Come on. Yeah, and there are times it seems, and this is a very Freudian point, that people aren't so addicted to liberty. Says Jefferson overplay his hand when he talks about what defines people as liberty-loving people. And hence the title of my book, The Disease of Liberty. If we don't have liberty, life is not worth living. And in his estimation, the whole American Revolution was based on that. Life to be lived under the yoke of the British government, the king, parliament, and so forth, dictating to us what taxes we have to pay, what we're going to do, where British soldiers can stay, they can stay in their houses, property, and so forth, and so on. That in itself, to people, is liberty really that life enhancing that in the manner that Jefferson thinks it is? And it's an open question. You've seen throughout history times where people seem to prefer, in studying Ukraine, there are times in the history of Ukraine of people who, since the late 19th century and all throughout epochs or periods of the 20th century, were really fighting rather strongly for liberty, for some sort of national identity. And once they got that national identity, once that liberty was sort of handed over to them with the fall of the USSR, the Soviet Union, they were not equipped to embrace liberty. They didn't really understand the concept of liberty, nor did Russia at the time, or many of the other. I mean, there's a lot of work in liberalizing and converting to a sort of capitalistic way of doing things. There's a lot of work and study to be done. It can't happen overnight. It's going to take years. Jefferson says that of a revolution, of implementing the ideology that drove the revolution. That's going to take time, and it's going to take a generation of men that are distinct from the generation of people who started the revolution. So the notion here is that liberty is a important concept for Jefferson. It's also a rich concept, and it can't be understood as just freedom from, right? There are certain constraints, that are certain obligations that a free people have, most important of which I mentioned with my friend, Dr. Garrett Ward Sheldon. Certainly he makes the same point, as it entails certain participatory responsibilities. If I'm going to be a part of a free government that guarantees liberties and rights, I have certain obligations to participate in the well-being of that government. And Jefferson says I need to devote as much time as I can to political matters as my personal affairs will allow. So liberty is not just doing whatever I want to do whenever I want to do it. It's a matter of belonging to a certain type of constitutional governments that guarantees the rights of all of its people, right? And doesn't subject any of its people to any sorts of biases, right? It is government run by the vox populi, by the voice of the people. And by that, he means the majority of people on any particular issue. Now, the last thing I'll say is the majority opinion infallible? He asked that question here. Is it an infallible guide? Right? It's not infallible, but it's better than the coercion that people have been used to in prior types of governments that are called aristocratic. Aristos is male nominative in Greek, meaning best. Aristoi, male nominative plural, meaning the best men. Governments, aristocratic governments, governments run by the best, which is usually some amount of some few people or one person who dictates for all the people what's in their best interest. Jefferson is certainly not for that. He's not saying that that governments by the voice of all people are necessarily better, but they are it is the only sort of government, right, that will guarantee that all people, right, that their rights will be preserved with some sort of dignity. So, in short, what can we conclude from study of this passage of some 10 sentences or so? Why is it put in there? It's an aside. Does it belong there? Not really, but it sort of follows from Jefferson's talk about religious freedom. We have freedom of religion, and freedom of religion is one of the most important freedoms that any liberal government, any Jeffersonian Republican can grant its people. The freedom of conscience and the freedom of to be able to worship as they deem fit. He always says a person's religiosity is his own. It's a matter between him and his God. And he doesn't say that pejoratively. He says that with the greatest respect, that it's a very personal matter. And he doesn't feel that he ever had the right. And I feel the same way. I don't have a right to tell someone how to think on religious issues. I have my own views. I don't try to. And I don't even like to tell people how to think about on political views. I may express my own views on things, but I'm not sure the world would be a better place if everybody thought the way I thought, or thought the way Jefferson thought. The point is, it is radically and critically important to have a government that tolerates differences of opinion, that sees, as Mill would say, differences of opinion on a particular issue as an opportunity for open, free, vital, and fruitful discussion for settling those issues. It's a very, very important point. It's the thesis that drives John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, written many years after Jefferson's death. And Jefferson is articulating something very, very similar to that of Mill. We need freedom of opportunity, freedom from government intervention, freedom of opportunity, which entails many different choices for fruitful living. And that also, once we get those, and government needs to assure us that we can live that way. Once we get those, we have certain responsibilities to work within the confines of the government, within the constitution of that government. We have an obligation to give back. So when we think of the campaign and the presidency and electing representatives and governors and so forth, this next presidential election, it's very, very important that we, discuss things. We have an open mind, that we appreciate differences of opinion on political issues, right? And Jefferson will tell us that this is very, very important here. that we have open, free discussion. And following the advice, the sage advice of John F. Kennedy, is something that just would not be had today. We should be thinking about, we should really, the most able and fit candidate would be a person who expressed Kennedy's view that the fittest candidate, the ablest candidate, is one who is in advocacy, one who advocates that we not concerned about what, if elected, what you're going to get from me. I'm going to cut your taxes. I'm going to do this and that. You're going to be getting from me, but ask you to give back. Yeah, my government will give to you, but you need to give back. That is the only way a free government can work. I'm Colonel Holowchak. I hope you enjoyed this one work 5 questions. It didn't have so many questions, but we did look at a particularly thorny, particularly vexing passage, and I hope to have made some headway into understanding why Thomas Jefferson put that in a most unfavorable place, what it means to him, and why it was so important that it be included somewhere in his notes on Virginia. That's it for me, TTFN, and we will do things again next week. Take care. Ta-ta for now.